Breaking news from the WNBA. The Seattle Storm are sending Jewell Loyd to the Las Vegas Aces in a blockbuster three-team trade that moves Kelsey Plum to the LA Sparks. That's according to ESPN. As part of the deal, Seattle receives the second pick in this year's WNBA draft from LA in exchange for the Storm's number 9 pick, while the Aces also receive the 13th pick, a second-round selection from the Sparks. Loyd is a 6-time All-Star and 2-time champ with Seattle, while Plum is a 3-time All-Star with 2 titles of her own out in Las Vegas. And we're now joined by CBS Sports WNBA analyst Erica Ayala on the heels of this blockbuster trade. These are some big pieces on the move, as well as, let's be honest, some top assets as well. But I want to get your initial reaction to the trade.
Well, we have been hearing for a little while the reporting of Annie Costabile at the Chicago Sun-Times, as well as Roberta Rodriguez with Beta Basket. We've been hearing that Jewell Loyd, especially after the investigation with the Seattle Storm, was likely on the move. And then, of course, Kelsey Plum was cored by the Aces, though she was considered, and still is technically considered, one of the top draws in free agency as an unrestricted free agent. So when you have 2 names like that, 2 Olympians, just won gold in Paris, they are going to, as you said, draw a lot of assets. And when you see a 3-team trade, obviously this was about as many teams as possible, but especially the Seattle Storm and the Las Vegas Aces being able to get value. Now, I'm not sure that I see the full fit for Kelsey Plum in LA at this moment, but I do think that Jewell Loyd and the Aces makes a lot of sense. And essentially, you're trading a like-for-like player as far as what Kelsey Plum and Jewell Loyd can do on the court.
Well, with Loyd to Vegas, Plum to LA, just how does this maybe impact the landscape of the Western Conference? And I kind of want to also throw in the league as a whole, getting some of these big pieces now in new places.
Yes, I think what we have seen in the WNBA, especially with the last collective bargaining agreement that the league is still under, though negotiating right now, we've seen a lot more player autonomy and movement, and that makes things really exciting. The last few free agencies have been very exciting. I think also that the conversation that players are having, including Jewell Loyd, who right now is, of course, in Miami playing with the unrivaled league, is all about the amenities that come with being in certain places. And Seattle and Vegas have been 2 of the places that have been heralded for what they offer to athletes. And so when you see this player movement and you see stars utilizing free agency with, again, a little bit more autonomy, I think you're going to start seeing, and we've already truly started to see, teams start building that infrastructure. We have Indiana that most recently has announced they have plans for a new facility, Chicago, Dallas. So everyone knows they've got to keep up with the Joneses in a manner of speaking here.
Yeah, speaking of keeping up with the Joneses, I know you said you didn't really quite see just yet that fit when we're talking about Kelsey Plum going to LA, but you got to think about it. She will be paired alongside last year's number 2 overall pick, Cameron Brink, who was off to a fantastic rookie year before that season-ending injury. I mean, that's a 3-time All-Star. We talk about 2 titles, but just looking at her joining that, what kind of expertise, what kind of knowledge, what can that really do for, I don't want to use this, but what kind of spark can that be for the Sparks out there in LA? I had to use it.
It was right there. I respect it. I respect it. And so I think you're right. With Cameron Brink coming back, hopefully very healthy from injury, as you mentioned, she was a dynamic force for that LA team. I think it's the overall organization and some of the things, again, that this is a legacy franchise. The Los Angeles Sparks played in the first ever WNBA basketball game. And again, we've seen other teams just build a little bit more infrastructure around their players. And so I think that there's a little bit of a, I've heard a time or two the phrase hybrid rebuilds come into play. They have a new coach. They are going to have now, as has been reported, a new player in Kelsey Plum. So I think the leadership from Plum, and I think maybe the reset for Kelsey Plum, being in a new environment, maybe taking on a different role, because she's coming from the Las Vegas Aces. A lot of people thought they could be in contention to over and usurp the Houston Comets for that four-peat. Of course, that didn't come to pass. The New York Liberty are champions, let's not forget. But I think it's just a little bit of a different culture change. And I think with that, it means that Kelsey Plum, if she does go to LA, will be utilized for some of her experience and her leadership. I mentioned that she was on the Olympic team, of course, has been with the Aces for some years. She just had her jersey retired by her alma mater in Washington. So there's a lot of great things. And I do want to say, I was in Paris for the Summer Olympics, and we got to speak to Kelsey Plum. She had a few things off the court going on, and she talked about just leaning into her faith and being so blessed, and just kind of almost laughing at all of the things that were going on outside of basketball, and the fact that she was at the foul line shooting free throws in Paris at an Olympics on a 5-on-5 team. So I wonder, I don't know for sure, but I wonder if also this is maybe just a really important, even personal reset for Kelsey Plum. And again, there have been reports that the same could be in play here for Jewell Loyd.
Yeah, that puts things certainly in a different perspective, at least for her and her career. But meanwhile, I want to go back to the Aces just very briefly, because you talked about how they were trying to get that three-peat, but instead now maybe seeking to compete for their third championship in the last 4 years, and certainly looking to build that core around A'ja Wilson. But just what does Jewell Loyd kind of add to now what the Aces are trying to build here?
Jewell Loyd, again, has a very similar skill set in a lot of ways to Kelsey Plum. I think of players that can play that number 2 guard in particular, maybe have the ball in their hands a time or two. But with Jewell Loyd, her execution from the corner is lethal. And with Jewell Loyd, we saw that even at the Olympics, there was some controversy there with how she was utilized, or in fact, how she was not utilized by head coach Cheryl Reeve for Team USA. And then again, there were a few things going on with Seattle, and we saw a little bit of her productivity and specifically her efficiency dip. But we also heard from Jewell Loyd in her exit interviews. I was there in Seattle. She said, hey, I didn't meet all of my benchmarks. That's never happened to me before in my career. But recently I was with her at Unrivaled, and she is having a phenomenal time in Miami. I mean, winter Miami, who wouldn't love it? But I think also it's been an opportunity for her, again, similarly to reset. She told me that she's finding joy in the game again, on the court again. And so when you have someone who has won titles in the WNBA, is an Olympian, and you again bring that leadership to a team like the Las Vegas Aces, who they have a few moving pieces and moving parts. You can't always keep a championship team together. Bringing in Jewell Loyd, who can be a dynamic shooter, help them spread the floor, has that leadership, I think is going to be huge for the Aces, and immediately puts them back into contention. They did struggle a little bit out of the gate in the 2024 season, found their way to the playoffs, where they actually were able to beat Jewell Loyd and then the Seattle Storm. So I think they're really looking to stay in the playoff conversation, but not just in the playoffs. They want to be a top team. And if this move comes to pass and Jewell Loyd goes there, you have to think immediately on paper, they're a contender.
Absolutely. You talk about the Aces and their moving pieces and moving parts. Well, not the only team that in January moving some pieces and some parts around en route to try to get to that title. As always, Erica Ayala, we appreciate your insight as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So taking a look at the odds for the WNBA title. Well, Liberty with the shortest odds to repeat as champs at +200. They're followed by this new look Aces team looking to compete for their third championship in 4 years. The Lynx, the third shortest odds at +330. And Caitlin Clark and the Fever, if you remember, just 3 seasons removed from being the worst team in the W. The fourth shortest odds at +900.